Happy New Year to you all, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all-new World of Warships gameplay today on our channel. And for our first video of 2017, we're going to be featuring the Tier 6 British premium battleship known as the Warspite, in a Tier 7 domination game on the map Estuary. As we sail alone today, the purpose of this video is not for me to provide my thoughts on this battleship, as I personally feel I'm not qualified enough yet to provide thoughts on battleships in general, as we articulated back in December 2016 when we featured the New Mexico, the American counterpart to this ship, at the same tier. But instead today I'm going to be focusing on one of my weak spots in World of Warships, and that is my ability to play battleships. Now you may be thinking at this point, well, perhaps that's just being a little bit over honest, or perhaps I'm being a bit false, but I'm being serious. I decided to go away and look at some of my personal statistics for this game. Not all my Warships Today ratings and things along those lines. I honestly couldn't care for all that stuff. It's just like XVM out of World of Tanks, and that's not got a place in my heart. The XVM stuff. But instead I just decided to look at how many times I've played out in destroyers versus how many times I've sailed out in cruisers, etc. And I have noticed, it's quite easy to notice if you look at my statistics, I really gravitate heavily towards destroyers. Then I gravitate towards cruisers, and then battleships, and then finally aircraft carriers. But the proportion of games in the other three classes compared to destroyers is insignificant, whereby to the point that I could consider myself experienced in sailing out in destroyers. Apart from Japanese destroyers, I still struggle with those from time to time, but with the other ship classes, not very experienced, especially battleships. And as a result, what you're going to see in today's gameplay is my life with battleships in a single match, the ups and downs that I experience. And we're going to start with a rising tide here, as we open fire on a Leander at long range, the Tier 6 British light cruiser, whereby we pick up an overpenetration and a penetration, doing just shy of 5,000 damage. Now with our reload almost complete, i.e. that 30-second reload on these 381mm batteries, 4 twin turrets, 2 mounted towards the bow, 2 mounted afterwards, we open fire once more, with the Leander sailing perfectly broadside, and we nail the target. Fairly well, sir, you've just been blasted back into 2016. But with a cracking start, just like our captain has said, you're going to see very shortly how things take a turn and a slight dip, whereby I start to miss a lot of shots. Now for me, this is one of the dissuading factors of battleship gameplay, whereby I'm not used to the fact that in my engagements I've got to get used to missing the target regularly as well as hitting the target regularly, i.e. doing no damage at all and then doing tons of damage. Now as we come down from our tidal wave, we open up with a load of armour piercing against the enemy Nicholas, and we pick up a good set of overpenetrations, 3 of them, doing 3,000 plus damage. Whereby for reference, the overpenetration damage with your armour piercing on this ship is 1,140 per shell, whereby your maximum damage upon Citadel is 11,400. A very nice amount of damage to have. Now the Nicholas dispatch, thanks to our assistance and that of our teammates, we're making our way north of Delta at this point. We're just going to sail towards the northeastern edge of Delta and then head down the eastern side of the map, keeping the engagement towards maximum range, whereby we have reasonably accurate guns, and I believe the Warspite's guns are pretty accurate compared to her competitors at Tier 6, and she has a maximum dispersion at a max range of 16.3 kilometers of 204 meters. But notice how when we hit the buy-in there, we picked up a penetration, 2 ricochets, and a shell that did not penetrate, doing a small amount of damage. Now it's at this point where my experience and my enjoyment of battleships begins to fade away quite noticeably. Now I'm not going to dissuade you all from playing battleships, but I'm providing you with my personal thoughts as to why I don't play this class enough. We open fire, again this time on an enemy York, the Tier 7 German heavy cruiser, and we pick up 2 penetrations, but we only do just shy of 4,000 damage. Now at this point when I'm playing the game, I'm thinking to myself, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I know I didn't get the Citadel, but the target wasn't sailing broadside, so I shouldn't expect it, and they are heavily armoured, but should I be happy with that result? Now one voice in my right hand ear is telling me you should be happy with any damage you do, it can have a huge influence on the final outcome of the battle. But then in the other ear hole I've got a small voice saying you're not really contributing at this point. And indeed we are sitting back at maximum range and we could be considered to be doing nothing compared to what we could be doing. But I don't really know anything else in the Warspite other than sitting at maximum range and using my armour piercing as best as I can. and we're going to use it effectively here against an enemy Akatsuki, the tier 7 Japanese destroyer, one of the new ones, as they sit on Delta and seem to be caught between a rock and 2 battleships, and also a York. Whereby I'm one of the battleships and our friendly Nurse now is the other. Unfortunately, our friendly York is going to be torpedoed to death, but as compensation, we're going to get a brilliant set of penetrations on this Akatsuki very shortly, knocking them completely out of the game, whereby it also appears as though their engine has been knocked out. We load up the armour piercing and fire away. 3 direct penetrations on the bow, picking up our second kill. Now the Akatsuki removed, things are really going to slow down now. And this is where I personally feel that battleship play for me becomes disinteresting, and this is probably why I don't play battleships that much. Because notice where I am at the moment. Now I can't go zipping across the battlefield because I've only got a top speed of 23.5 knots. I'm being shot at by a number of battleships at reasonable range, and I'm going to try and fight back. Well, at least one battleship I should say, and potentially a heavy cruiser in the form of the York who we're targeting. But the problem is I'm never going to get a really good set of shots off, so it feels as though I'm wasting a lot of time. Of course I'm not, because I'm keeping enemy ships engaged. I'm trying my best to do some damage. But here I opened up on the enemy York and I pick up 2 over penetrations and damage one of their guns temporarily. Again, I'm not feeling too happy with what I'm doing at this point, because whilst the York may have to repair their gun now and use up their consumable for a limited period of time, I don't feel as though I'm making that much of a contribution. So now I look off to my starboard side and I see an enemy Furitaka making their way through the middle of the map, coming from, pardon me, the west to the east. I'm thinking to myself, well, if they're going to turn broadside or even an angled broadside to our allies, perhaps we can get a good shot with armour piercing as we take some glancing fire from what is most likely the enemy York, who seems to have beached themselves. Now we're taking our time turning our guns, because what you have to keep in mind is that the Warspite's guns take an eternity to turn, whereby with the expert marksman skill for your captain, they're going to turn for 180 degrees in 56.3 seconds, or in other words, you're going to grow a beard whilst you're waiting for them to turn. And we take some light damage from armour piercing from the enemy York here, as we now turn broadside to them and get ready to try and finish them off as our guns finish reloading. Although they themselves seem to have turned their attention elsewhere for a temporal piece of time, as our teammates lash in a couple of rounds and we open fire with hopefully the killing blow. But again, we only picked up 2 over penetrations, and at this point I'm starting to really think to myself as I'm playing, what's the point? Now, of course I shouldn't think this way, but it's just a little bit of frustration, just because I was really hoping for that kill. I was hoping that more than just 2 rounds would hit, so you can see where I'm coming from now in my mental state. But nonetheless, keep the motivation up, try and sink the York this time. As we fire off our aft-facing guns. And there we go, 1 over penetration secures us our 3rd kill, as we hit the edge of the map, and now we're going to reverse out of it, or turn out of it, picking up the speed penalty as we go. Now, the Warspite, to be fair, turns quite nicely. She has a turn-in circle radius of 550 metres, which makes her quite manoeuvrable, and with our rudder shift time of 14.2 seconds, in the condition we have her in, she can turn pretty much on a dime for a battleship and actually dodge torpedoes quite easily and come about into a new and unexpected situation, i.e. an enemy cruiser's just come around the corner or a destroyer's come around the corner, pretty easily compared to other battleships such as the New Mexico, for a comparison. And as we come about, we're no longer being detected, with our base detectability by sea being 13.8 kilometres, and after we fire our main batteries that goes out to 25.2 kilometres, so everyone's going to know we fired. But still, this ship's got reasonable detectability values, we can't complain. And it appears as though we've been spotted by an enemy aircraft, lurking somewhere probably south of us. It may have been the aircraft from New York, for example, and they're only detecting us intermittently, which means it's a long way away, i.e. approximately 11 to 12 kilometres away. Now we can see here an enemy Nizer now as we put up our spotter plane, going head to head with one of our friendly destroyers. We don't want to fire in case our dispersion hits us, and our friendly kamikaze takes out the Nizer now, almost getting killed themselves in the process. So now both a New Mexico and what appears to be a Scharnhorst make their way down into Charlie, i.e. the objective. Now at a long distance here, we're going to try and snipe the targets. We're going to use our armor piercing at long range and hope that we get some deck penetrations. We'll start off with the Scharnhorst, opening fire, taking our best guess. And with our muzzle velocity of 732 meters per second on both our armour piercing and high explosive rounds, we think we've given enough lead, but let's see. So 1 over penetration out of all the shells we fired. Now, to be fair, I'm not the most accurate shot with battleship guns, so I'm happy with a single over penetration. It's more than what I would have expected. And perhaps we made the Scharnhorst turn a little bit southwards to try and evade our fire. If so, we've done our job. So we now switch our attention towards the enemy New Mexico, a slower, less manoeuvrable target compared to the Scharnhorst. Let's see if we can penetrate them. As we get all of our guns onto the target now. Seeing where our rounds are going as well, trying to mark up our shots. But we can see our dispersion is not on our side at this point, whereby our shells are going across the target, i.e. straddling it. Although in the second part of our salvo, no, still just overreaching the mark slightly. Now if our spotter plane are returning, we're not going to really be in the battle for a little bit of time now. We can shoot at this Scharnhorst for a brief period of time, but their manoeuvrability and the fact they're coming under sustained fire is going to make it likely they're going to keep changing direction and evade our incoming fire. We open up with a full salvo once again, and we straddle the target once more. What about the second part of our burst? Nope, straddled the target again. And it's at this point in my battleship play in general, not just the Warspite but in battleships in general, when this occurs frequently, that I begin to get fed up. Now, this is not to dissuade you from playing battleships, but to give you an idea of my experience with them and why I don't feature them that much. So what else can we talk about whilst we're trying to find a target we're actually going to hit, as we open up with another salvo on the enemy Scharnhorst and actually stop dead still in the water for a period of time, just so we can get a few more shots on target. Well, the Warspite in general, from my experience with her so far, as we pick up a single penetration on the enemy Scharnhorst, has been an enjoyable one nonetheless. She's a durable ship with 53,800 HP, and her armour profile goes from 25mm of armour at a minimum to 330mm of armour at a maximum. And she has a 24% torpedo damage reduction due to her torpedo belt. So she is a sturdy ship and she can really hold up against the competition. And her guns are absolutely lovely when they do hit, just because they do an absolutely huge amount of damage. As we open fire with our bow facing guns towards the enemy New Mexico, trying to loop our rounds over the landmass in front of us, and we do pick up a single penetration for 3,700 damage, which I guess is respectable. And now we are being detected both by the enemy Scharnhorst down south and also the ships up in the north, but the fact we weren't really moving means that the Scharnhorst completely misses, and the only ship that does hit us seems to be the enemy Bayern off in the centre of the map. As we start to heal some of the damage we've taken finally, we're finally taking some damage. And perhaps this is a noticeable factor, the fact we're not really getting into the fight, and perhaps we should be getting a little bit closer. As we throw a load of rounds on the enemy New Mexico, picking up 2 penetrations plus an overpen for just shy of 6,000 damage. Again, I'm not too satisfied with that, although I believe that the New Mexico was turning towards us, so we should be happy with what we dealt, as we could have ricocheted. Now the New Mexico at this point is wiggling side to side to avoid our fire and that of our friendly battleships. And we're going to open up with another salvo. And angles aren't going to matter too much in that New Mexico, as we're about to see. 381mm caliber armour piercing shells don't care. As we pick up a Citadel at that angle, knocking off 15,000 health for the New Mexico and pretty much putting them on death's door, with the rest of our ships about to finish her off by the looks of things. So we turn our attention back towards the centre of the map against an enemy Bayern. Now this Bayern is pretty heavily crippled. Our friendly Gneisenau is on death's door as well. We're expecting our friendly battleship to use their torpedoes to knock the Bayern out, but we're going to open fire anyway just in case, as our rounds loop in on the target. And we pick up 4 penetrations, but perhaps due to damage saturation, we only did 2,000 HP of damage, which again is a bit of an aggravation. So you can see how I'm back and forth in my mental state, thinking to myself at one point, yeah, this is fun, and then the next point, this really isn't fun. But nonetheless, we're keeping in high spirits now because we have picked up 3 kills and done 80,000 damage. We want to go for that Kraken now, as it is possible 3 enemy ships are remaining. So we open fire on an enemy Nuremberg here up in the north, who's very, very busy taking on one of our battleships on objective Bravo. We open fire with a full salvo. It seems to be well aimed, but no, it just falls short of the target, and I really want to make that Nuremberg explode, because they have a habit of doing that. Fortunately for us, however, a friendly Farragut destroyer on our team is going to provide us with a distraction. Therefore meaning that the Nuremberg is completely unaware of the fact that only 10 kilometers away from them is a Warspite poised and ready to open fire with its main batteries. So attempt number 2, let's see if we can kill it. The Nuremberg turns completely broadside to us, all of our rounds go in. And there we go, 4 over penetrations, giving us our 4th kill. Would have been nice to have a citadel, but we're not going to complain. As now our friendly Farragut turns their attention towards the enemy Gneisenau, as our Gneisenau goes head to head with them. The two are exchanging torpedoes, and the enemy battleship is sailing broadside to us, so that we'd hope we'd be able to pick up a number of hits, i.e. citadel hits, or at least massive damage for over penetration, or just penetration. But we get the Kraken by knocking off 1000 HP because our friendly battleship put a load of torpedoes in. So it feels like a really cheap and cheeky Kraken unleashed, but still, we'll take it. So you can see why this battle has been a very up and down one in terms of my overall mindset and just in general the performance. Because we have picked up the Kraken, but a number of you, especially the more experienced battleship players amongst you there, may be thinking right now, well, did you really deserve this Kraken for the fact you really didn't contribute to the kills? And as you can see in the chat on the left hand side of your screen, because the game's practically at its end, our team's got all the points in terms of 954, well now 958 to the enemy's 718 as they incline. And we've got 2 objectives. The enemy Scharnhorst can't get into either of the objectives to prevent any further progression towards the win. We can just relax, and I'm saying to everyone at this point, because this was before the start of 2017, Happy New Year everyone, and to our team, we just need to chill out now and not risk anything. But as a last ditch attempt at grabbing some damage, we are going to open fire of our guns one last time and see if we can hit the Scharnhorst hard. But my inexperience with aiming my guns and also a little bit of dispersion is going to come back to haunt me as we open up, and it really looks as though we gave too much lead. Perhaps we'll clip the bow? No, we shot right over the target. That was just poor accuracy on my part. But with that, the game comes to its end finally, and it's time for us to take a look at the post-game stats. A rather mixed affair, but still a victory. For it we received 428,573 silver credits, 7,470 experience, and we picked up 3 achievements. First Blood for picking up the first kill of the match, the Kraken Unleashed for picking up 5 or more kills in a single battle, and the Devastating Strike achievement for destroying an enemy ship with a single artillery salvo, torpedo salvo or aircraft attack by causing damage to over 50% of the destroyed ship's normal HP, in this instance being the enemy Leander at the start. Our battle performance consisted of 84,387 HP of damage, made up of 3 citadel hits, 47 target hits for our main batteries, 3 incapacitations, and 5 enemy ships destroyed. Looking at the team scores, we can see that we came first on our team in terms of base experience earned, 1,992, 466 more than second place on our team. I was rather surprised by this myself, because we didn't carry our team to victory, nor did we play the objective. But thinking about it, one key attribute we had throughout that entire game is that the intensity of that match for us was rather moderate. We were not under any serious pressure, but our guns were always firing at our foes, and over the course of the game we gradually accreted damage. In a couple of cases we did a lot of damage to particular ships, i.e. the enemy Leander, Akatsuki and the enemy Nicholas, and that is probably what clinched us the top XP score for our team. Looking at our detailed report, we have 2 key items to note here. One is a reinforcement of the fact our guns were always firing at a given foe, regardless of who and where they were on the map, whereby we destroyed 5 enemy ships and we damaged 4 others. So in essence we hit 9 out of the 12 ships on the enemy team, i.e. 75%. On top of that, we have to consider that we never fired a high explosive shell. And with our high explosive shells having a 34% fire chance, perhaps that would have been advisable in the cases where we didn't have a clean shot to hit our foe on a broadside with armour piercing, and perhaps that would have boosted our damage output even more. Looking at our credits and experience earned finally, we can see that we walked away with, after deductions, 390,883 silver credits, and our commander picked up another skill point. To conclude, hopefully today I've articulated the reasons why I do not play battleships as much as I should, whereby the primary factor is the 50-50 balance between enjoyment and frustration that I feel with this class. On the one hand, the enjoyment is when you aim in your shells perfectly, dispersion is on your side and you blow a ship out of the seas from maximum health. On the other side of the coin, meanwhile, you have the frustration when you aim in your shells perfectly and they just don't penetrate the target as effectively as you would expect, picking up only penetrations instead of citadels, for example. Or alternatively, when a target is sailing full broadside to you, you aim in perfectly and your shells just miss the target because dispersion's having none of it. But really, I need to stop finding a reason not to play battleships, and instead I need to give this class a more adventurous attempt. And as a result, as of this video, I'm making it my New Year's resolution for 2017 in World of Warships to play the battleship class a lot more than I recently have been, and find enjoyment in the class just like many of you have. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future World of Warships videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and fair seas.